If you work with somebody else, one of the greatest things you could do is to love somebody enough to say, are you attending to the most important things in your inner circle of influence? Because if you're not, there's no way that this other thing you're doing in your work is going to bring about the satisfaction, the fulfillment you want. I wish somebody could have sat me down years ago just to say, hey, I think that you have some things that you're running from that might be propelling your business, but it's never going to satisfy you if you don't become personally, spiritually, emotionally healthy. Welcome to At the Table, the podcast that lives at the intersection between teamwork, organizational health, leadership, and culture. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by Cody Thompson, my co-host. And Cody, we still cannot convince Tracy to come on and do this.
She won't do it. It's
One
just
day,
going to be us.
That's right. But we're going to have her pop in sometime. We're going to do that. She's doing research right now. Cody, what's the topic of today's podcast?
Beware the high achiever.
That's right. And I think we've talked a little bit about stuff related to this before, but there's a lot more to talk about that we really wanted to get to in a different way. And when we talk about beware the high achiever in ourselves and others, there's this kind of interesting thing growing up. People go, well, that guy's a real high achiever or she's a high achiever. And that's always been considered a really good thing. But so often I've come to realize that if a person is just naturally feeling like they have to be a high achiever, they have to go above and beyond all the time in everything, that's often an indication that there's something else going on behind the scenes. Now, that doesn't mean people shouldn't have high standards, but there's people who define themselves by their success and wanting to do more, and they're never satisfied. And that is often a function of never feeling like they're enough. And those are lifetime wounds, and we've talked about that before. But we need to be careful, both when we are seen as high achievers and we start to associate ourselves with that ideal, or when we work for people that are high achievers, we need to make sure that there's beneath that there's something very healthy that's propelling them, and not something that's unhealthy.
Yeah, Pat, this makes sense, your perspective on this, because you only hire medium achievers like myself.
That's right.
And
Pride myself.
I didn't know that was part of the hiring criteria for you. No, I think anybody who's worked on any team for any given number of years probably has experienced exactly what you're describing, right? Which is there are people in the world, and for one reason or another, that high achieving, we hold that up with such a bastion of excellence, right? Like they're up early, they're there late. And like you said, I love the way you put it. Like we need to kind of do our due diligence and really understand where the motivation for that comes from.
Right.
Because, the word beware is maybe the key word in the title of this, which is there are instances and many leaders that we've been around and consulted to where if it's not kind of oriented and founded on a healthy place where that achievement comes from, it can be really detrimental for people on the team.
Yes. And, we were going to call this podcast. This came about because in prep with Matt and Tracy, we talked about two different podcasts we were going to do. We realized they were the same one. We were going to do a podcast on the leader's first inner circle of influence, and circle of influence, circle of concern, Stephen Covey, great stuff about that. And we thought, the leader's first circle of influence has to be their personal life, who they are internally. And then we also had a podcast queued up called Beware the High Achiever, and we realized it's the same thing. Because when a high achiever is achieving a lot, but deep down inside they're not psychologically and emotionally and spiritually healthy, then they're doing that because they're afraid of something. They're afraid of failure. And when people are motivated by a fear of failure, it's only a matter of time before that manifests itself in something unhealthy. And so if you are a high achiever, or you're working with or for somebody who's a high achiever, it's so important to help them address the most inner parts of their healthiness, because that's the only sustainable way to be a high achiever, is to do it not from a position of that's my identity and I'm afraid to lose it or I'm afraid to fail, but I want to do the very best I can with the gifts God gave me.
Yeah, and Pat, it's so interesting. Like when you think about the work that we do, right? We talk to the market about creating healthy organizations. And then when we get invited to help people create a healthy organization, we say, hey, we really need to start at the leadership team. They need to be healthy. And here's what that means. And there's dysfunction on the team, and we help them sort of tease that out. And then when we get to that stage, we're actually like, well, actually, there might be a layer beyond that, which is is the leader itself healthy, or the leader's personally healthy on the team? Because all of the dysfunction, even all the way down the organization, while we can teach behaviors to help people sort of get more aligned and cohesive, really at the end of the day, if there's not that inner circle of influence, or we've talked about like the inner courage to look at yourself and understand like what your motives are and why you're doing this and what drives you, that can influence the rest of the organization. And quite frankly, it's almost harder to not address that and then try to address the downstream symptoms of that dysfunction.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, depending on whether we're talking about ourselves or somebody else, we have a different ways of identifying whether it's healthy or not, whether your insight is healthy. On an external way, if I were working with a leader who was really a high achiever, but they weren't physically healthy, they were like eating poorly and not exercising and taking care of themselves, or their prayer life was non-existent or poor, or that their relationship with their spouse or their family was poor and they weren't investing in it. Everybody has their problems. Don't think anybody's perfect. But if they were not addressing those things, their first circle of influence, but they were really doing a good job running their organization, and I've seen this for 30 years, there's always something, the other shoe's going to fall. And we talked about the kiss cam thing, like clearly that's a person whose company might have been doing well, but his home life wasn't good. That's always a sign that a person's achievement is being done for the wrong reason. And we can all relate to that ourselves when we think, why am I neglecting the really critical internal things, but I'm worried about that stuff out there and that there's something not healthy. Asking ourselves, though, if we're going about our jobs and when something doesn't go well, we get too upset about it because we feel like somehow this is a threat to my identity, or I'm not going to be happy if this next thing doesn't go well, or I need more attention. That's a big sign that we're not in the right place.
As you said that, Pat, I wasn't around when you founded the company, but I remember a handful of conversations of even you started this kind of, I don't know what exactly the right word is, but this concept of organizational health, and what's interesting is you chose the word health, which seemed like maybe not the perfect word for it.
Because we didn't want to use the word health. We looked for years. We said, what is this? And there was no other word that really defined it.
And I think like what's interesting to me is, so the marketplace probably would have thought, oh, we'd love the word organizational effectiveness, organizational success, all of these like external metrics for how will we grow, how will we succeed. And so I love that, fast forward 30 years almost, that organizational health has become more of like a staple sort of concept in the world of business. And that it sort of parallels the conversation we're having right now about leaders and internally saying like, hey, as much as you can produce is not really the metric. Like that's and quite often it is actually a distraction and a kind of a salve that they do in terms of like, hey, I'm gonna distract myself with success because I'm not willing to go the route where I look internally and look at what it would mean to grow and be healthy. And so in similar fashion, it's like the organizational health parallels the leader health in that way.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking about, if you're listening to this, you can first apply it to yourself and say, am I whole? Am I healthy? Am I in a stable place where I'm doing what I do for the right reasons, not because it's my identity or I'm afraid? If you work with somebody else, one of the greatest things you could do, iron sharpens iron, is to love somebody enough, a friend or a boss or a coworker, to say, hey, are you attending to the most important things in your inner circle of influence? Your spiritual, personal, family health. Because if you're not, there's no way that this other thing you're doing in your work is going to bring about the satisfaction, the fulfillment you want. And now, this is not to say it's binary, that people are either healthy or unhealthy. I mean, I've been doing this for 28 years as of last week. And I've grown in my personal health so much in the last year, thanks be to God. So I was struggling with identity and failure and all those other things for the longest time. I wish somebody could have sat me down years ago, and maybe I wouldn't have been able to hear it, but just to say, hey, I think that you need to focus on these things first. You have some things that you're running from that might be propelling your business, but it's never going to satisfy you if you don't become personally, spiritually, emotionally healthy. So I'm not saying this from a standpoint of, oh, there's all these people out there. I'm saying I know what that's like. I know that I would go, well, we made our numbers again, and why am I not feeling satisfied? It was because I had to deal with things that were inside me, not out there. And it wasn't going to be on a spreadsheet or in an article or anybody else's opinion of me. It had to be from inside.
Yeah. It reminds me, Pat, of one of my favorite client stories, which is my brother, who's one of our consultants, has a client, CEO client, and he met this gentleman when he was building a startup company. Like, I think he had committed like 6-7 years of his life to growing this company, and they were wildly successful. And he would work, and it was definitely in the category of high achiever, right? And he discovers org health through some of our consulting. My brother and a few other consultants really adopts it as his primary framework. They exceed their previous levels of success. Everything goes really well. We brought him to one of our principal consultant retreats. So like oftentimes we get all 50 of our consultants in a room. We interview clients that really have understood org health and what it means, and we sort of learn from them. And at the moment where I can't remember the exact question that they asked, but they said, "Hey, what has been the biggest impact for you personally in org health?" And I think the sentiment of the question was like directed at his business, right? And so I think like everybody anticipated this answer that was going to be, hey, we figured out the structure and we have, a framework around our values and we grew our company to X amount multiple of revenue, and his answer really struck a chord with everybody in the room. It was amazing. He said, when I met Casey and Nate, these two consultants, I was 100 pounds overweight. I'd been working every Saturday for 7 years, and I hadn't picked my daughter up from school. And he's like, organizational health exposed me to the fact that I was unhealthy as a leader. And since these guys have helped me transform our business, sure, that's great. He's like, I am now focusing on my own health as an individual and growing, and I haven't missed picking my daughter up from school for 4 years. And everybody in there was like, can you imagine a better answer? It's not like the tens of millions of dollars of more revenue. It's that it allowed this leader to be introspective about the places that he wanted to grow as a human being and as a family man. And in addition to that, his business grew, and I really think that this is
right.
Kind of the sentiment that we're trying to get at, is that inner work is a part of this. It's not just business strategy and success. It really is about whole human beings and whole leaders.
And I'm glad to say that it also corresponds with the organization being better, because a healthy person is a better leader and they lead a healthy organization. But I don't want to justify it just based on that.
Yeah.
I want to say he did the right thing and he knew that. It wasn't, well, let's see if this increases our revenue. No, you have to be healthy as a person first. What a bonus that it actually is better for your organization and the people that you lead and manage there. It's thank God that those things go together. A healthy organization needs healthy leaders, and they have to be healthy people before they can be a healthy leader. I recently worked with a leader who is gone all the time, and he loves his family, but he's gone all the time. And I confronted him about it, and he was just like, "No, I love it. I love when he gets something from the meetings he's at and the events he goes to. And I'm going to be sitting down with him to talk to him about, I'm concerned that you are putting a disproportionate amount of your identity in your work at the expense of what's going on in your life." And he's a great guy, but everybody, even with good intentions, can get lost and feel like, man, this work thing is really amazing.
Yeah.
And it will bite us in the butt. And it's bitten me in the butt. It's every leader I've worked with has probably learned this the hard way in one way or another. And it's a good thing when we challenge one another about this. Iron sharpens iron, and we have to tell people, I'm really concerned. Yesterday, something happened to me, Cody, which is weird. And this, I'm not bragging at all, but I was giving a presentation and somebody introduced me as the GOAT. Or people on there were like, oh, he's the GOAT for organizational health or something like that. I was giving a speech. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm terrified. Because I don't want to be the GOAT of anything. I just want to be the best person, parent, spouse, follower of Jesus that I can be. And if I'm doing good in my work, that's great. But I do not want that moniker. I don't want to take consolation in that, because if I'm doing that at the expense of the more important things in life, then I really, really have to be concerned. So I looked at that like, okay, be careful here.
Again, to go back to that word beware, is because on one hand, you have that client story
Yes.
that I just talked about, but I've been around you long enough to hear stories of people, extreme high achievers. And I think that the warning is this, like, it's not just the effects of you not being courageous enough to look internally and figure out where that is coming from.
Yeah.
It doesn't just affect you. It doesn't just affect your team. Like, you have a story of a very famous CEO who was really unwilling to look internally and was an extreme high achiever, famous, intimidating, all of that. And it actually decimated a whole business and a whole regional economy as a result. And like, so I think the warning here is a stark one to say, hey, if you're seeing that in the leaders around you, if you can take a moment as a leader and look internally and realize that there's something to do, that is a very important work to do before you continue to get more influential.
I'll even go so far as to say, if you work for a CEO or a leader in your organization that is really, really determined and high achieving and really focused, but their personal life is a mess and they're not attending to it, think about getting out. Think about getting out. First, go to that person and try to help them get better. That's the greatest gift you can give. But bad things usually happen in those kind of organizations.
Yeah.
Here's a crazy thing. We should probably end the podcast right now, but I had another idea. I've been talking to people lately about golf a lot. And I know these people that are executives, leaders, and they've done very well in life. And they're getting into golf a lot now. And I like to golf. I don't golf very much because I don't have the time. I'm not very good at it, but I really enjoy not being good at it. I mean, it's still really fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear about how angry they are when they golf. And they're really grinding on getting better. And I've heard their wives say, why do you care so much? And I think sometimes there's something about that too. It's like, wouldn't it be better to be a pretty good golfer and go out there and not worry about it? Because none of these people are going to make it a career. But sometimes it's like the high achiever is like, I have to be a high achiever in everything. And it's like, be pretty good in golf and be good with that. And I have to say, as a person who grew up with high achiever syndrome, I love that I can go golfing with people that are better than me. And when I hit a good shot, I can go like, oh, that was fun. And I really don't, it's like a sign of my health that I don't really care about that very much. And I think when I was younger, I would have struggled with that more. So like, find things that you're not awesome at and enjoy it, and allow yourself not to compare yourself to others and go, that's fine. It's not who I am. It's just something I do. Anyway, I just thought of that because I know a lot of really wonderful people, faithful people, who are really wanting to get better and wanting to be able to beat other people they know.
It's a reminder that life is for living, not necessarily, like, you want to enjoy it,
Exactly. Now, you are quite a good golfer, Cody. I'm really concerned. No, I've been with you.
I have 3 kids. I get to golf like 10 times a year. But
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, that's it for today. Beware the high achiever in yourself and in others, and love them enough to help them focus on the real internal circle of influence first. It's good for them. It's good for the people around them. It's good for the organization too. And that's all we need to say. Thank you, Cody. I appreciate it. Love talking to you about this stuff. We'll talk to everyone next time on At the Table. God bless.